My name is Clara Thompson. At 34, my world didn't just break, it plummeted. One moment I was arguing with my husband on the grand terrace of his family's estate. The next, he shoved me. I stumbled, colliding with our 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. A low, ornate balustrade, a danger I had warned them about, splintered beneath her small body. They spun the story of a tragic accident. I knew it was the first casualty in a war against a dynasty, a war they had just started. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button, because if you've ever had to go above and beyond for your family, trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and champagne through the Beacon Hill estate. I stood at the edge of the Ashford Gala, my navy dress clinging awkwardly to my frame, feeling like an interloper in a world of glittering excess. The mansion glowed under chandeliers, its marble floors reflecting the laughter of Boston's elite. My daughter, Sophie, darted through the crowd, her auburn curls bouncing, her giggles a beacon in the sea of polished smiles. She was 6, all energy and light, the only thing tethering me to this gilded cage I'd married into. Julian, my husband, was holding court near the grand staircase, his charm a magnet for investors. His mother, Eleanor, presided over the room like a queen, her diamond necklace catching the light. Richard, her husband, stood nearby, his eyes scanning the crowd for any crack in the Ashford facade. I was Clara Thompson, the archivist who'd stumbled into this dynasty, forever the outsider, my quiet ways deemed unsuitable by their unspoken code. I sipped my wine watching Sophie chase a balloon. She was my world, her brightness a shield against the whispers that followed me. But tonight, something felt off. Julian's glances were sharper, Eleanor's smiles tighter. I brushed it off, blaming the weight of the gala's expectations. Then Julian beckoned me to a high terrace overlooking the gardens. I followed, my heels clicking on the stone steps, Sophie trailing behind, humming. The terrace was quiet, the city lights a distant hum. Julian's face was taut, his voice low. "You're not playing the game, Clara. You're making us look bad. The investors notice your distance." I bristled. "I'm here, aren't I?" Smiling, nodding like always. "It's not enough," he snapped. "You're embarrassing me." His hand gripped my arm hard. I yanked away, my voice rising. "Let go, Julian. I'm not your prop." His eyes flashed, and he shoved me. I stumbled backward, my heel catching. Sophie was right there, her small body too close. My heart stopped as I collided with her, her scream piercing the air. She hit the low, ornate balustrade, a hazard I'd mentioned to Richard years ago, ignored for its historic charm. It gave way, and Sophie fell. Time fractured. Her cry echoed as she plummeted to the lawn below. I lunged, screaming her name, but the edge was too far. I collapsed, my hands clawing the stone, my world unraveling. Chaos erupted. Guests gasped, but Julian and Eleanor didn't rush to Sophie. They moved through the crowd, their voices calm, spinning a story of a tragic accident. Richard took charge, his deep voice cutting through the panic, framing it as unforeseeable. I barely registered their words, my focus on the ambulance lights flashing in the distance, Sophie's still form being loaded inside. At the hospital, I sat by her bed, her tiny hand limp in mine. Machines beeped, a cruel rhythm. "Dr. Thorne," the Ashfords' trusted physician, approached, his face kind. "Her spinal injuries are severe, Clara, but her prognosis is excellent. She'll recover." He handed me a sedative, his hand patting mine. I nodded, numb, clinging to his words like a lifeline. But his calm felt too practiced, a shadow of something I couldn't yet name. As I stared at Sophie's pale face, a crack formed in my heart. This wasn't an accident. Julian's shove, the ignored balustrade. It was a chain of choices, and my daughter paid the price. The Ashfords were already rewriting the story, and I was too broken to fight back. Not yet. Sophie's hospital room was a sterile cocoon, the beep of monitors a constant reminder of her fragility. I hadn't slept in days, my eyes burning as I watched her chest rise and fall. Then, a miracle. Her fingers twitched, a faint flicker of life. I clutched her hand, tears spilling. "You're fighting, baby? I'm right here." That spark of hope was a lifeline, pulling me from the abyss. But the Ashfords were closing in. Eleanor's call came like a blade, her voice cold as marble. "Clara, Julian has a critical investor meeting for his startup. This melodrama with Sophie is destabilizing his image. We need you to issue a statement. Call it a simple childhood accident, for the family." I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. My daughter's fighting for her life, Eleanor. I'm not lying for you. Her pause was deliberate. Think of Sophie's future, Clara. Stability matters. The line went dead, and I felt the walls of their world tightening around me. Julian visited that afternoon, his face a mask of contrition. He carried a plush teddy bear, its fur soft, equipped with a high-tech feature to record my voice for Sophie. To soothe her when you're not here, he said, his eyes avoiding mine. I mumbled a thank you, too exhausted to argue. But that night, alone, suspicion gnawed at me. I examined the bear, my archivist's instincts kicking in. My fingers found a seam, and inside, a tiny recording device. I played it back, my blood running cold. My voice, frantic and grief-stricken, filled the room, screams from the hospital begging Sophie to wake up. But the audio started after her fall, Julian's shove erased. It wasn't just a cover-up. They were building a case against me, painting me as unhinged. The betrayal sank deep, a poison in my veins. I wanted to scream, to confront them, but I was alone, outmaneuvered. The Ashfords' wealth and influence loomed like a fortress, and I was a speck in its shadow. But I wasn't helpless. Not yet. I feigned compliance, nodding when Eleanor called again, promising the statement. Then, in the dead of night, I dialed a secure line to an old colleague, a digital forensics expert named Lena. Lena, I need you to analyze a device's metadata, I whispered, my voice trembling. I need to know when it was activated. Please. She hesitated, then agreed. Send it over, I've got you. As I hung up, I stared at Sophie's sleeping form, her chest rising softly. The archivist in me woke, sharp and focused. They thought they could bury me in their lies, but I'd spent years unearthing truths from dusty records. This was my fight now. And I'd dig until I found the truth, or they broke me trying. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but my world was Sophie's steady breathing and the weight of the recording device in my bag. I was an archivist, trained to find patterns in chaos, and I leaned into that now. At a library across town, I pored over news archives about the Ashford estate, cross-referencing them with maintenance requests I'd glimpsed in the family's files. A pattern emerged: ignored warnings about the terrace balustrade, dismissed as aesthetic priorities. My stomach churned. They'd known it was dangerous, but the Ashfords were watching. Richard's email arrived like a slap, patronizing and cold. Clara, focus on Sophie's recovery, not dredging up a painful past. We have this handled. By noon, my access to the estate and the family's digital archive was revoked. The lockout stung, a reminder of my place in their world. Disposable. I sat in the hospital cafeteria, defeated, stirring cold coffee. Then a memory surfaced. Eleanor, years ago, tipsy at a dinner, mentioning her mother's private ledgers. She never trusted Richard, she'd slurred. Kept her own records, hidden away. I'd dismissed it then, but now it was a lifeline. Those ledgers, if they existed, might be in the estate's old library, a neglected wing I'd explored with Sophie. There was a secret compartment behind a panel. I'd seen it once unopened. I had to get back in. The thought of sneaking into the estate, their domain, made my pulse race. But Sophie's pale face flashed in my mind, her fingers twitching with fight. I couldn't stop now. I planned my move. I'd use the excuse of gathering Sophie's toys and books from her room. The staff changeover at dusk would be my window. That evening I stood outside the estate, my heart pounding. The mansion loomed, its windows dark. I slipped through a side gate, my sneakers silent on the gravel. The halls were a maze of shadows, every creak a threat. I froze as a security guard's flashlight swept past, ducking behind a tapestry, my breath shallow. The library was close, its musty scent pulling me forward. I reached the panel, my fingers trembling as I pried it open. Inside, leather-bound ledgers, their pages brittle but intact. I scanned one, my breath catching. Entries detailed Richard's early deals, hints of fraud, a betrayal of Eleanor's family. This was bigger than Sophie's fall. It was the root of their empire. As I tucked the ledgers into my bag, a floorboard creaked. I turned and Julian stood in the doorway, his eyes cold. This vendetta ends now, Clara. He didn't know about the ledgers, but he knew I was digging. He stepped closer, his voice low. You're putting Sophie at risk. He pulled out his phone, showing a live feed of her hospital room. My heart stopped. Stop, he said, his fist slamming the wall beside me. I fled, the ledgers heavy in my bag, his threat echoing. This wasn't just about covering up a moment of rage, it was about protecting a legacy built on lies, and they'd destroy me to keep it buried. But I had proof now. And I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The ledgers were heavy in my hands as I stumbled out of the estate, Julian's threat ringing in my ears. My sneakers crunched on the gravel, the night air sharp against my skin. I glanced back at the mansion, its windows like eyes watching me flee. Sophie's face on that live feed burned in my mind, her small form vulnerable in that hospital bed. They could reach her, they would reach her if I didn't stop. My breath hitched, but I kept moving, clutching the proof of their lies. Back at the hospital, I hid the ledgers under Sophie's extra blankets, my hands shaking. I checked her room for cameras, paranoia clawing at me. She slept, her chest rising softly, unaware of the war raging around her. I kissed her forehead, whispering, "I'm fighting for you, baby." The ledgers were my weapon, but I had to be smart. The Ashfords weren't just covering up Sophie's fall, they were guarding a fortune built on betrayal. I needed to act fast. The estate's staff changeover had been my only shot to get in undetected, and I'd barely made it out. I replayed the heist in my mind, slipping through the side gate, heart pounding as I navigated the darkened halls, the library's musty smell, the creak of the secret panel, the weight of those leather-bound pages. I'd nearly been caught. A security guard's flashlight had swept inches from my hiding spot behind a tapestry. My pulse still raced at the memory. Sitting by Sophie's bed, I flipped through the ledgers under the dim glow of a lamp. Eleanor's mother had been meticulous, her handwriting sharp. Entries from decades ago hinted at Richard's fraud. Shell companies, manipulated stock deals, the slow dismantling of the Preston family empire. He'd married Eleanor, then betrayed her father, buying his company for pennies. The Ashfords' wealth, their untouchable status, it was a house of cards built on stolen ground. I was so lost in the pages that I didn't hear the footsteps until they stopped. Julian stood in the library doorway, his silhouette blocking the light. I froze, the ledgers hidden in my bag. He didn't know I had them, but his calm was chilling. "This vendetta ends now," he said, stepping closer. His phone lit up with that live feed of Sophie's room, a silent threat. His fist slammed into the wall, inches from my face. "Stop." I'd escaped, but his words followed me. This wasn't just about his shove on the terrace, it was about protecting a multi-generational lie worth billions. They'd do anything to silence me, hurt Sophie, frame me, destroy me. My chest tightened, fear and fury warring inside. But I had the ledgers, and they didn't know. Not yet. I leaned over Sophie, brushing a curl from her face. "We're not done," I whispered. The archivist in me was awake, and I'd tear their empire down brick by brick for her. My temporary apartment was a cramped box, the ledgers spread across a wobbly table. The city hummed outside, but I was locked in the past, cross-referencing Eleanor's mother's diaries with public records. The truth emerged like a ghost. Richard had used insider tips from Eleanor to bankrupt her father's company, then swooped in like a vulture. Every deal, every dollar, was tainted. I scribbled notes, my hands trembling with the weight of it. But the Ashfords were fighting back. My phone buzzed with notifications, Boston's high society blogs, anonymous sources whispering about my emotional instability. Clara Thompson, the unhinged outsider making hysterical accusations. Friends I'd known for years stopped calling, their silence louder than words. The Ashfords' machine was relentless, painting me as a pariah. I felt the walls closing in, my world shrinking to Sophie in these brittle pages. Then Lena called, her voice urgent. "Clara, the bear's metadata. It's a bombshell." My heart raced as she explained. The audio of Julian's shove was gone, wiped clean, but the device's activation log was unerasable. It had been turned on 5 minutes before our argument on the terrace. This wasn't a panicked cover-up, it was premeditated. Julian had planned to record me, to trap me in a manufactured meltdown. Sophie's fall was the horrific, unintended cost of his scheme. I sat back, stunned. The room spun, my anger a living thing. He'd risked our daughter to protect his family's lies. I wanted to scream, to march to his office and shove the truth in his face. But I had no power, no allies in their world. The ledgers, the metadata, they were pieces of a puzzle, but I needed more to fight an empire. I flipped through the ledgers, desperate for a lifeline. A name caught my eye. Harrison Lowe, the CEO Richard had ruined, his company absorbed in the same fraudulent scheme. Eleanor's mother had noted his downfall with sympathy, a rare crack in her stoic records. Lowe was a long shot, but he'd known the Prestons. He might know the truth. I tracked him down to a retirement home outside Boston, my last hope. The ledgers were my shield, the metadata my sword, but I was one woman against a dynasty. I kissed Sophie's photo, tucked in my wallet. "This is for you," I said, my voice breaking. I'd find Lowe, or I'd fall trying. The retirement home smelled of antiseptic and faded dreams. Harrison Lowe sat in a worn armchair, his eyes sharp despite his frail frame. I'd expected resistance, but not this venom. "Another Ashford come to gloat," he rasped, waving me away. "Get out!" I stood my ground, my voice steady. "I'm not an Ashford, I'm Clara Thompson, and I'm here to take them down." I pulled a ledger page from my bag, pointing to a stock transfer only he and Eleanor's father would have known about. A coded deal buried in the fraud. His eyes widened, the bitterness cracking. "You have her ledgers," he whispered, his voice trembling. "How?" "They tried to bury me," I said. "They hurt my daughter. I'm not stopping." Lowe studied me, then nodded. "Sit." He shuffled to a footlocker, pulling out a stack of documents, his own records corroborating the ledgers. We worked late, piecing together a case. Dates, deals, signatures. It was ironclad, a weapon to bring Richard down. But the Ashfords struck first. A sharp knock woke me the next morning. A process server handed me papers, a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit, and a restraining order, barring me from contacting the Ashfords or their associates. My stomach dropped. They were burying me in legal quicksand, stalling until they could silence me for good. I called Lowe, my voice shaking. "They're coming for me." "Then we move faster," he said, his tone hard. We finalized the case file, every page a nail in the Ashfords' coffin. I stared at the documents, my hands steady despite the fear. Sophie's laugh echoed in my mind, her fight fueling mine. The lawsuit was a cage, but I'd built a key. I just needed to use it before they broke me. The lawsuit papers sat on my table, a noose tightening around my neck. The Ashfords thought they'd cornered me, their legal barrage meant to crush my spirit. But I wasn't surrendering. Sophie's fight was my fire, and I had a plan. I called their lawyer, my voice steady. "I want a settlement meeting. My apartment tomorrow. Richard, Eleanor, Julian, all of them." He laughed, assuming I was folding. I let him think it. The next day, my cramped apartment felt like a battlefield. I'd set up a monitor on the wall, the case file ready. Sophie's photo sat on the counter, her smile my anchor. When the Ashfords arrived, their arrogance filled the room. Richard's suit was immaculate, Eleanor's pearls gleamed, and Julian's smirk made my skin crawl. "Let's make this quick, Clara," Richard said, leaning back. "Name your price." I didn't flinch. "This isn't a negotiation." I hit a key, and the monitor flickered to life. The bear's metadata appeared, showing its activation 5 minutes before Julian's shove. Their faces tightened, but I wasn't done. I projected pages from the Preston ledgers, each entry a dagger. Richard's shell companies, the stock fraud, the betrayal of Eleanor's father. Then Harrison Lowe's documents, corroborating every word. "This is your empire," I said, my voice cold. "Built on lies." I turned to Eleanor, locking eyes. "Richard didn't build a life for you. He stole your family's legacy, tore it apart for profit, and Julian," I pointed at him, my voice shaking with rage, "was willing to sacrifice my daughter, your granddaughter, to protect that stolen throne." The room detonated. Eleanor's face crumpled, her eyes darting to Richard, then Julian. "Is this true?" she whispered. Richard blustered. "She's delusional." But Julian's silence was deafening, his smirk gone. Eleanor's hands trembled, her world collapsing. I'd aimed for her heart, knowing she was the linchpin. Her obsession with status had blinded her, but her family's honor was her core. Richard lunged for the monitor, shouting, "This is fabricated." Julian snapped at him. "Shut up, Dad!" Their unity fractured, accusations flying. I stood still, my heart pounding but resolute. Then, piercing the chaos, police sirens wailed outside, growing louder. Red and blue lights flashed through my window, painting the room. The Ashfords froze, their eyes wide. I didn't blink. "You thought you could bury me," I said. "But I sent everything. Ledgers, metadata, Lowe's documents, to the district attorney and the Boston Globe. This ends now." The door burst open. Officers stormed in, badges flashing. "Richard Ashford, Julian Ashford, you're under arrest for fraud, reckless endangerment, and evidence tampering." Richard's face drained of color as cuffs clicked around his wrists. Julian struggled, shouting, but they dragged him out. Eleanor stood frozen, a statue of shattered pride, watching her empire crumble. As they were led away, I sank into a chair, my body trembling. Sophie's photo caught my eye, and I touched it, tears falling. I'd done it. For her, for us. The sirens faded, but the weight of the fight lingered. I was free, but the scars ran deep. The fallout was swift. The police had acted on an anonymous tip, Harrison Lowe's lawyer, I later learned, backed by the evidence I'd sent. The Boston Globe ran the story the next day, The Ashford Deception, a headline that shook the city. Richard faced fraud charges, his real estate empire in receivership. Julian was indicted for tampering and endangerment, his startup dreams dead. The lawsuit against me vanished, a desperate ploy undone. Eleanor became a ghost. I saw her once on the news, leaving the Beacon Hill estate foreclosed and empty. Her pearls were gone, her posture broken, she was a pariah, stripped of the status she'd valued above all. I felt no pity. Her choices had fueled this machine, and Sophie had paid the price. A year later, I stood on a Cape Cod beach, the ocean breeze tangling my hair. Sophie ran ahead, chasing seagulls, her laughter bright and free. She used a single cane, brightly decorated with stickers, her steps stronger every day. Her spinal injuries had left scars, but her spirit was unbroken. I watched her, my heart full, a genuine smile spreading across my face. The weight of the Ashfords was gone, replaced by something real. My phone buzzed. A publisher, interested in my manuscript, the Preston Ledgers, a story of corporate deceit and family betrayal. I'd poured my soul into it, every page a reckoning. "We think it's a bestseller," the editor said. I thanked her but declined the call for now. This moment wasn't for work. It was for Sophie. I walked to her, kneeling in the sand. "Ready to build a castle?" I asked. She grinned, handing me a plastic shovel. We worked together, shaping towers and moats, the waves crashing nearby. The sun warmed my skin, and for the first time in years I felt light. I dismantled a corrupt legacy, exposed the truth, and survived. But this, Sophie's laugh, her hand in mine, was the only legacy that mattered. The fight had changed me. I was no longer the quiet outsider bending to fit their world. I was Clara Thompson, a mother, an archivist, a survivor. The scars remained. Nights when Julian's threat echoed, days when the smear campaign's sting lingered, but they were fading. Sophie's resilience, her joy, was my healing. As we finished the sandcastle, Sophie looked up, her eyes bright. "It's perfect, Mommy." I hugged her, tears pricking my eyes. "It is, baby, it really is." The horizon stretched wide, full of promise. We'd build more than castles now, lives, dreams, a future founded on truth and love. That was enough, that was everything. If my story has taught you anything, let it be this: never let anyone silence your truth. The Ashfords had wealth and power, but they were terrified of one thing: a single, undeniable fact. Your voice has power, even when you feel small and alone. Don't let them bury your story. Dig for your truth, speak it, and you can dismantle any empire built on lies. That is the ultimate freedom.